there, this is Dennis Anyone with Dennis Hensley. It's a podcast about making things up and making things happen. I love talking to creative people, and today my guest is an actor, singer, and activist. His name is Bryan Terrell Clark. He is one of the stars of the new series Diarra from Detroit, and I met him the other night at an FYC event for that show, Diarra from Detroit, because I happen to know Diarra Kilpatrick, the star and creator of that show. She was part of a writers group that I was in. It was called the Writers Access Project, and it was a program from the Writers Guild, and I've known her for about 9 years, and she was brilliant and a powerhouse then, and it's just been amazing to watch her blossom. And she has her own show now, and it's amazing. It's a mystery, it's a comedy, it's got a lot going on, it's sexy, it's funny, it's smart, and Bryan plays her gay friend. His character's nickname is Mr. T, and occasionally he spills some tea, but it's a really fun show. He's great in it. And I met him at this Q&A, and I was like, hey, I want to interview you for my podcast. He's like, all right. And he took my card. So it happened. And before he did Diarra from Detroit, he's been in other shows like Snowpiercer. He was in Ava DuVernay's When They See Us. On Broadway, he was in Hamilton. He played Marvin Gaye in Motown the Musical. So he's had a great career, and he was so much fun to talk to. He got really deep, and maybe I got teary, but maybe I didn't fall apart like I sometimes do. It was beautiful. So I hope you enjoy it. But before we get to that, I want to remind you that there are now 3 ways you can support Dennis Anyone. What? First of all, you can leave a tip in my virtual tip jar, help me cover my expenses. I always appreciate that. The other thing you can do that is at that same link is you can do a thing called Buy Me a Coffee. It's just a way to give me a little money for a coffee or, like 2 coffees or whatever. If you're just like, I like that interview, I want to give him a little shout out. It's a sweet little way to do that. And it means a lot. It really touches me. I've already had somebody buy me a coffee, and I was like, oh. And that adds up, and it helps me. And I do a lot of work in coffee houses, and it feels good. So both of those options are on my website, DennisAnyone.net. You'll see a little tab that says Virtual Tip Jar, and you just click on it. All right, and the other thing you can do is you could become a subscriber to DNR Studios. I'm part of a group of shows under the Derek and Romaine banner, and for a monthly fee, you get my show early, and you get all these other great LGBTQ shows. So check that out at dnrstudios.com. Oh, and one other thing I want to plug, the Mismatch Game is coming back to the LA LGBT Center on June 29th. It's going to be a blast, 8 p.m. Come laugh with us. Always a good time. It's our Pride edition, Taste the Rainbow, and I hope to see you there. All right, enough of the plugs. Here now is the interview with Bryan Terrell Clark. Joining me now via Zoom from LA, it's the actor Bryan Terrell Clark. He is one of the stars of the show Diarra from Detroit on BET+, which I just finished watching today, and I'm in love with it. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. It's really nice to be here. I'm glad that you love the show as much as we do.
It's really rich. There's so much going on, which I will get into. But first I want to say why it's really on my radar and why I was really excited to see it is the creator and star, Diarra Kilpatrick, is someone I've known for about 10 years. We were in a Writers Access Project group together, which was this program from the Writers Guild where you had to submit a script, and it was like a blind submission, so they didn't they didn't know who wrote what, and they were trying to shine spotlights on underrepresented communities, people of color, women. I ticked the gay box, and we were part of this group together. And she was impressive then, and to watch what she's done since then. She acts in this. She created it. She writes it. Like it's just her hometown. Like, I'm just kind of in awe of her, and I've always had a talent crush on her, and now it's in overload. But I understand you've known her for quite a while yourself, right? How did you guys meet?
I have. I've known her for a really long time. I think around 2007. My best friend was living in Koreatown at the time. Her and her husband had just moved into this apartment building. Right. And my bestie is gay, and was flirting up a storm with this woman. And I pulled up, and I was like, what is he doing? Right. But I, like you, fell in love with Diarra and her husband, Miles. They are, salt of the earth human beings, but also they're just like ridiculously talented, like on a whole nother level, just the way their brains work and the way they think about story and tell story is really top tier. And so, when I found out she was working on this project, I jumped at the opportunity to be in. We had a mutual friend who was doing a comedy show, and I showed up at this comedy show, and one of the other writers on the project said, "Are your ears ringing?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" She's like, "Yeah, are your ears buzzing? We talk about you every day." I was like, "Talk about what?" It's like, Diarra has this new show and she's writing this character that's in your voice. Like they're writing this character based on you. And I was like, say less. Let me.
Wow.
She thought at the time that I was obligated to another show that was actually just a limited series. So I had wrapped that project. I read her script, and I'm pretty hard on pilots. I think pilots are tough. I just think that you're trying to cram so much into this first episode. You have to get people to understand the world of this show, understand the characters. You have to make us fall in love with these characters. You have to do all of that without being too heavy-handed. It just needs to feel like we have been dropped into this world. And when I read the script, I told her this is probably the best pilot I've read in about 10 years. It's so good. It's so rich, like you said.
It works on all these levels. It's a mystery about a woman who is having trouble in her marriage. She has a Tinder hookup that is magical, and then the guy disappears, and she's convinced that she couldn't have been ghosted because she's too fabulous. It was too magical. So this mystery unfolds. And you play Reggie, a.k.a. Mr. T, T-E-A. Talk to me about your character and how he fits into the story.
I think he's everybody's favorite husband. I think everybody... the husband, a gay husband. What I love so much about him is that, to me, he is the B. Arthur of this gang. He's the truth teller. He's grounded.
Right.
And he tell you the truth in love. And I think that his function in this piece is to kind of, be the ride along with Diarra that also keeps her off the rails, right? Like he has no other real personal investment initially other than, wanting to see her kind of explore herself in the safest way possible. So she brings up this Tinder date to him while he's at school. He, of course, believes that she's ghosted. And as you watch the series, he kind of follows her down the rabbit hole of the underworld of Detroit. And so he ends up on this adventure with her, and he may or may not have a little love interest himself as he follows her into the abyss of looking for this guy that she had this romp with, right? So it's really interesting. It's a dark comedy. It really feels like the television of old. She talks often about how she sat with her grandmother and she watched like Matlock and Murder, She Wrote. She was also a series regular on a mystery on HBO, and I just feel like that's her wheelhouse. She really understands how to like really thread the needle of a mystery in a really compelling way. But I think what makes it feel so fresh is that she has faced it with these characters that feel like people we know, especially from cities like Detroit, Baltimore, where I'm from, Philly, where I went to college. It's like there's an urban landscape of people of color that don't often get the opportunity to play in the playground of mystery. Yeah. And this is their world, and I love it so much. There's lots of little nuances and authentic kind of idiosyncratic things about these characters that if you are from any of these cities or if you know anybody from these cities, you're like, I know exactly who that is. I know exactly who that is. And Mr. T definitely checks one of those boxes too.
Well, Mr. T, at one point, he's a gay character, and somebody was like, why are you still living here? And he was like, New York's too dirty, LA's too white, and Atlanta's too gay, so I'm staying put. Like, and I there are all these little truth bombs that the scripts insert along the way where you go, okay, it's this propulsive mystery and there's a comedy, and then something will land and you're like, wow, that's an idea. And it's got a generous spirit to it. Like there's a episode that kind of goes into the kinky world of BDSM, and it goes into a club, and there's comedy to be found there, but it's also like, okay, maybe I need to open my mind around sexuality a bit. And your character has a line that I wrote down at one point because I thought nobody in shows says this. Sex is fun, and giving one person the key to your whole sexual identity is less fun. And I was like, yeah, that's something, you know, when you're having the debate around open relationships and monogamy, like nobody ever puts it that clearly where it kind of lands like that. Can you talk about that part of Mr. T's character?
Completely. It's funny because me and Mr. T are very much alike. But there are right at the fork in the road, there are these spaces where we slightly differ.
Right.
I experienced some things he's already experienced, or I haven't experienced some things he has experienced. And the way he functions in the show, I think, is, you know, he's definitely one who's not looking for love at the moment. He really leans into this idea of sexual freedom and discovering yourself through your sexuality, right? And I think that he diametrically opposes the world that Diarra came from. Essentially, she's getting this divorce because her husband mentioned to her the option of open marriage. And what's interesting and kind of ironic about the piece is that, you know, they're separated because of that topic. But right after that, Diarra begins to explore her sexuality, first with this Tinder hookup, and then she finds herself in episode 2 in this BDSM club. And I think that a lot of Black women, particularly in our culture, just haven't been or are shamed. They're kind of shamed into not talking about their sexual exploration. And right in episode 2, you have Diarra like strapped in. You know what I mean? It's like,
and it's not just played for a joke or a crazy, get me out of there. Like, it opens her mind, and I think the piece as a whole is very generous to the different people within it. There's a sequence that goes into a strip club, and there are these strippers that get interviewed, and yes, they're dancing, and it's, you know, it's a decadent strip club, but it's also not judgmental about them, and they get to sort of express themselves. I found the whole piece to be kind of like very generous of spirit with the various people that come into the story.
And to me, one thing that Diarra does really well is she turns stereotypes on their head, right? So like, my character is the gay best friend, but he's not like super flaming and flamboyant. She kind of turns a lot of the tropes of what that character could be on it. We go into that BDSM club in episode 2, but this woman who is kind of like guiding Diarra through this section of it is this like empowered, statuesque, really intelligent Black woman.
Yeah.
And then when you go into the strip club later in the season, these are women of a certain age. You know, we're exploring their past through the lens of Black women who have kind of lived that life, which is not necessarily the lens you expect to go into a strip club with. She really turns every single character stereotype on its head, and I really love that about the character work that she does.
Yeah, and there are episodes where you're a little bit suspicious of a certain character, and we're meant to be, and then something flips, and you're like, oh, I understand them now. That wasn't what I thought, and her character is experiencing that as well, and it's just a way of bringing a lot of interesting topics about the world generally into this mystery comedy story, and it's just rich that way. Your character says something else in an episode that I had to write down. Being gay is not romantic, and you talked about how he's in that place. That's where that character is. Mm-hmm. But I heard that line. I watched that episode this week, and one day last week I had 2 interactions with 2 different friends, both of whom I really respect.
Yeah.
Who had hookups recently. And both of the people in the hookups expressed a little bit of romance, a little bit of tenderness. One of them texted something nice with a little heart, and the other one wanted to stay the night. And both of the friends of the people that I know were like, no.
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. In other words, it was this thing of like, not only are we meant to not be romantic, but being romantic is for suckers. Being romantic is not the way to be. And it hurt my heart a little.
You know, I think it's just something for us as queer men to kind of unpack and talk about, right? I think that I'm married, right? So my journey with myself and my sexuality has been a really interesting one. I mean, I have a mother who's a pastor, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so growing up in church and growing up with her as a minister, first a school teacher and then a minister, and then eventually getting remarried to a pastor and then co-pastoring a church, there was a lot of shame and there were a lot of guilt, right? Around sexuality. Also, when I was younger, you know, it wasn't even legal for same gender loving people to be married.
Right.
So the context by which, especially, I can only speak to men, the context by which men usually are introduced in their adulthood, where there's some sense of agency into sex and sexuality, is usually from the space of hookups and sex. I mean, men are men regardless of what they're attracted to. And men are usually attracted by sight. And so we then thrust ourselves into the world of technology.
Right.
You know, that's both the hookup apps and social media. And so everyone is selling this image of themselves. And when it comes to men, we're usually attracted by the images first. And so you can quickly and easily find yourself in a space where you are hooking up sexually, person to person to person to person to person, with no strings attached. Literally people texting NSA on an app, right? There's no string. It's just sex. And I think that there is a level of, and I'm not Brene Brown, but I would guess in my experience and in my kind of viewing of it, sometimes initially it is a response to the guilt and the shame and the kind of suppression.
Right. This is the only way we can connect. That other stuff isn't for us.
Right. We're not even, that's not even a part of the conversation. Yeah. We're so suppressed in terms of our sexuality that, especially when you're a teenager or in your early 20s, you're horny anyway. And I can't remember the rising peak of men's sexuality, but it's early in our experience.
Sure.
And so you've got, horny, half naked men, and the world becomes your oyster, and sex is usually first. And I think that it takes a person either really being designed for intimacy first and then sexuality to get there, or, like in my experience, you kind of been there, done that.
You've done it. You're ready for something else.
You've done the dating. It's like, I've done it. So there's a desire as a mature man to want to build a life with someone. Yeah. And so entering back into the dating space from that context is very different when you've been a loose cannon for a couple decades. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And also, I think part of what I thought was poignant about these exchanges is I could see the fear of getting hurt behind it. They talk a big game like, can you believe he texted me this hard? I roll. And it's more like, I don't think I want to put myself out there. I can't, you could.
But Mr. T as a character, that's definitely true. I think that he, there's this great Shakespeare line, thou protest too much, and it's this idea that he keeps talking about not wanting to be in a relationship. And in his protest, there's revelation. There's something being revealed about his fear of intimacy. Right. I think, unfortunately, Terrell, this DJ guy that he ends up kind of hooking up with, and I guess this is life. It kind of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Yeah. If you believe in the back of your head strong enough and long enough, you kind of manifest it. And so this guy is not as salt of the earth as you might think he is. He becomes a bit of a hobosexual. Yeah. And,
that term made me laugh out loud because he's crashing at Mr. T's place, and he's like, does this guy even have a house? Like, he's there all the time, and you start to be suspicious. Very funny.
And I think that's a part of what I love about what Diarra wrote. There's a sense of she's, as a storyteller, she kind of like, I imagine her going through the world of all of her friends and just grabbing stories and putting them in her backpack. So there are lots of things that we've said or experienced that are actually in the script, or some mutual friends that we know, and she just tells those stories. So like, that's why they feel so real, because a lot of them are. The premise of the actual show is based on a true mystery. There was this guy who showed up into a police station in Detroit and said, hey, remember that kid that was kidnapped over 20 years ago? That's me. Like, that's based on something real. Wow. The idea that you'd have a hookup that just kind of sticks around and you guys are cool, but, you can't get him out of your house. That's a real thing. I mean, people have experienced that. Right. So, you find Mr. T in this space of like telling Diarra to explore her sexuality, while I think his journey is at the very origin of exploring his heart.
Yeah, he's got walls up, for sure.
He's got all these walls. Yeah.
Speaking of walls, my favorite detail of the DJ that won't leave is that he paints you an accent wall without your permission, which is either reason to kick someone out or to fall in love. I can't decide, but I love an accent wall as a thing.
I'd love to know for the listeners, if you woke up next to a guy that you hooked up with, you guys been hooking up for a while, and then you come home from work and the dude has painted a wall in your house.
Right.
I mean, talk about laying claim or, peeing on it and saying it's mine. I mean, the guy paints a wall.
Yeah.
What's hilarious about that is we have a mutual friend that actually happened to.
But here's the other thing. It probably looked better. It probably rocked. It was probably awesome. And
that's like, you don't take this liberty to paint a wall in my house, but it looks good.
You kind of nailed it. That was the perfect color.
Yeah.
Did you spend much time in Detroit? You guys shot the whole thing there, or just the exteriors?
We actually been in New Jersey. We did shoot some in Detroit. We got a lot of exterior in Detroit. We are waiting on Detroit to get that tax credit. It's because even as a creator, I've started to produce now, and I'm sure you know a lot about this, and some of your listeners may as well. But a lot of times when you're shooting in a specific place in the show, it really just depends on what place you can go to that has the agency that'll allow even get made. And a lot of times that really just boils down to the tax credit. That's why a lot of things are shot in Atlanta. Everybody's like, why is everything shot in Atlanta? Well, because there's incentive to shoot in Atlanta. So there was a lot of incentive to shoot in Jersey.
Yeah.
All really, really desire, in future seasons to shoot most of it in Detroit.
Yeah.
But we did get an opportunity to shoot some. So that's good.
Yeah, no, it had a real sense of place, however you did it. There's a scene in the pilot where you and Diarra and Dominique Perry, who plays Aja, are in a diner and you're kind of riffing. And I'm like, oh, this has that Sex in the City chemistry, friends at a meal feeling.
Yeah.
Was that something you could feel happening? Like, oh, I could watch these people have a meal for, 5 seasons of episodes.
Well, that to me is something I prayed to manifest. I prayed to be on a show that literally felt like Friends. I said that. I said it needs to feel like Friends or Living Single. I want to be a part of an ensemble cast that feels like I want to hang out with them. You know what I mean? The fact that it's also thrown into the genre of a mystery just gives it that engine. Yeah. I was in love with shows like Insecure. I was in love with shows like Atlanta. The casting and the chemistry was always something I really felt leaped through the screen.
Right.
I think that Diarra intentionally built a cast that would feel that way, but I think that she wanted a story that would drive forward, and that's where the engine of the mystery comes from. So so you get a little bit of both. You get that feeling of the Sex and the City cast. I love that analogy as well.
Just around a table, and it's like funny. The rhythms are on, like people are talking over each other. It just crackles, right?
Yeah, and we all feel that way about each other too. If you see us together, we're not that different energetically than our character. So it was also really great to kind of build that family on and off screen. Yeah, so all of that's real.
Well, I love stuff like dream boards and things like that. And you said you sort of manifest. I love the woo-woo stuff. I am into it. But you said you sort of manifested this job for yourself. You said that on the panel that I got to see.
Yeah.
Talk a little more about that. Did you literally say it out loud? Would you go around telling people? Was it something private? Like, how did you think about it?
Yeah, I kind of journaled about it. It's funny. I have different ideations of it as I grow as a performer. But I think one of the things that's great about our community, but also a little toxic, is like once you're working on something, the real question is what's next.
Right.
And times for me, as opposed to just thinking, ooh, can I get a job? Ooh, can I get a job? I really sit and I think to myself, what do I want to do now?
Right.
I did a lot of Broadway, 8 shows a week. And I wanted to continue to work hard, but for way more money. And so that's part of it.
Right.
And a lot of Broadway is on the body.
Yeah.
It's literally a lot of the work is on the body. So I was looking to spend more time in television and film intentionally. I had gotten some really great guest stars, some really great recurring roles in a lot of heavier content.
Yeah.
I went to Yale School of Drama, and I think a lot of times when you see that on the resume or like when we come into the auditions, it's immediately like, oh, they can handle the drama, they can handle the text.
Right. If we wanted a funny person, we'd go to UCB or we get a stand-up. It's not going to be the Yale guy. Exactly that. And so I had kind of started to just journal that
it'd be really great to be a part of an ensemble cast that's this, and this. It'd be really good to do something that's got a little drama in it, but that's really funny.
Right.
It'd be really great to be able to flex those muscles. What I did not have any idea, this is where the universe can surprise you. I had no idea that my friend, who I've known for so long, would create that opportunity for me. That is something that I would have guessed in a million years.
Yeah.
So I kind of knew what to do next.
Yeah.
I also knew I wanted to be a series regular. I think a lot of people are very specific about the kind of work that they want to do. And for me, I knew that the next thing I wanted to do was to be a series regular. So it was literally a dream come true. It's something I sat and journaled about and meditated about. And then it came together.
I'm curious, you mentioned that your mother's a pastor and you grew up in the church. And then, but also for gay people, the church isn't always a friendly place. How did you navigate that? What was your journey like around that?
That's what I'm writing about right now. It's interesting. For me, there was always a bit of a double-edged sword, a dichotomy, a true parallel and contrast of my church, because the Black church is full of a lot of love.
What kind of, it's a Christian church, right? But is it sort of Baptist or Episcopalian?
Yeah,
like, what's the denomination?
So it was non-denominational, but it was very, very Pentecostal.
Right.
Almost apostolic in its belief system. So it was very charismatic. So they believed in prophecy and laying on of hands and speaking in tongues. And it was like,
it was a show.
It was a show.
Right.
The choir was singing and people could preach. And it was honestly where I got my theatrical beginnings. I mean, it's those Christmas plays and Easter, pageants and directing the choir and singing in the choir. It was all those places, right? But what's interesting is when I first came out to my mother, I feel like I had to come out to this woman 3 times. But around maybe the second or third time, one of the things that she said to me is becoming the spine of a project that I'm working on right now. But she said, "Son, I love you. I love you unconditionally, but I'll never accept it."
Wow.
And I told my sister, who's also an artist, and she happened to be on a radio station in Atlanta, and she didn't say who, but my mom was listening. And she mentioned that, she was talking to someone who had a conversation, and their loved one said, "I love you, but." And anything after the but is the very condition of your love. So if you say, "I love you unconditionally, but," anything that's coming
after
the
contradiction. Yeah.
And that is my experience of the church. I feel like it's a lot of, and it's Black community too. Let's just be honest. I think for us, there's a lot of don't ask, don't tell.
Right. Love the sinner, hate the sin.
Yeah. Love the sin. And to me, characters like Mr. T build the bridge from that old world cultural kind of thing was into kind of where we are now. There are amazing churches around the country right now that are Black Christian churches that are accepting of queer people. And no, they might not necessarily wave, rainbow flags from the pulpit. So they still have that element of don't ask, don't tell, but it's just not as closeted as it used to be. And so culturally, I think we're, especially in urban spaces in America, I think we are growing and we are shifting and change is happening. And I think that seeing characters like Mr. T are like part of that, right? It's part of like breaking down a lot of those stereotypes of what we think queer people are.
Did you ever sort of step away from your spirituality and being like, they don't want me, then and you came back around? Because Diarra said you're a very spiritual person. I asked her about you before we did this interview. Yeah.
I'm a spiritual person, and so is she. And for me, I would honestly say that my journey as a queer Black man actually drew me closer to my spirituality, closer to God.
Right.
I think I had to get to the root of what I believed God really was, how big the universe is. And I had to begin to really dig into, I'm not going to pretend that the journey didn't start with theology. It did. For a while, I thought I was going to be a minister. Right. And so I really dig into like, what is this book that I'm saying I follow? Like truly. Right. And the beginnings of those studies are shocking. It's understanding that it's not one book, that it's 66 books over thousands of years, that there's different compilations of it, that in America, slaves, once they were even found out that they were able to read and allowed to read were given different versions of the Bible. It's like, it's digging into all of that history and unpacking just a really clear notion that religions across the world are man's attempt to have relationship with something greater than themselves. And so everyone's details of how to do that are going to be different, religion, but also person to person. Even within a church, everyone is having their own spiritual experience. That's very different than the person that's next to them. And so for me, I think understanding some other principles and laws of just how the universe works, really understanding the history of the religion I say I'm a part of, unpacking all of that. And to be honest, it's like eating a bony fish. You got to chew up the meat, spit out the bones. And so that's kind of how I feel when it comes to religion right now. I think Christianity has terrible PR.
Yeah.
Horrible things since pre-Crusades to now. So I think, when it comes to Jesus, we cool. When it comes to Christianity, I'm a little bit like,
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I get it. Yeah, it makes sense.
So over time, I think I've had to find my own relationship outside of the religion of God. And I think that everybody who's deeply spiritual is going to be on their own personal relationship journey anyway.
Creative careers have ups and downs. You probably went through periods where you're like, I don't know what's next. Did having a sort of faith in something bigger help with that? What gets you through those downtimes?
For me, it truly does. I'm a firm believer, and maybe I'm an optimist, but I think to do this and to stay in it as long as I have and to continue in it, you kind of got to be. I think I really do have a firm belief that things are always working out for my highest good.
Right.
I might not know how. I might not know when. That's another thing I've learned about manifestation over the last few years. You can actually tell the universe what it is you want, and you can find the feeling of that. Like, what is that going to be when you get that TV show that you wrote greenlit? What is that feeling, right? And then you look for that feeling every day. The thing I found that you really can't tell the universe is how and when.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you stuck on when or how, you will drive yourself crazy. And I think as an actor, you never know how and when.
Yeah.
You never. There are things that I did and I was like, this is going to be the biggest hit the world has ever seen.
Right.
And it was like, it was good, but it
didn't change the world. You think there's going to be game changers. And then you realize, even when they sort of happen, they don't really change the game. You're still in it. There was a post on your Instagram where you wrote like, happiness is a choice. I'm obsessed with the science of happiness. I've been studying a lot and I find that topic very interesting. And as I was looking on your Instagram and reading about you, I was like, you don't get this deep without going through stuff. It seems like you've always sort of kind of been searching, and you probably had some obstacles as well.
Yeah. How deep we try, Dennis? How deep we trying to? We can go deep.
We can go. I love that stuff. My listeners are like, oh shit, he's gonna cry again. I tend to cry sometimes, but I was like, you're not that guy if you haven't faced some stuff. If things had just unfolded very smoothly, right?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I heard so there was a young woman who was a beautiful talent that I saw at Temple University. I saw her play the witch in Into the Woods, and I was coming back as an alum, and I said, "Hey, listen, I just graduated Yale School of Drama. You are fantastic as a performer. I think as soon as you leave Temple, go to Yale. You'll work for the rest of your life." And then she won an Oscar.
Wait! You said the name and it went quiet. The Zoom went quiet. Who was it?
Da'Vine Joy Randolph.
Da'Vine Joy, amazing. She was the witch in Into the Woods. I bet she killed it.
Killed it. I love that people see her as a singer. I'm sorry, as an actor, but she's also a phenomenal vocalist. She's a great storyteller. And one of the things that she said really hit me hard in her Oscar speech. She said, "I've always wanted to be different. I've always wanted to stand out." And I remember as a child, I wanted the exact opposite.
You just want to fit in.
I prayed so hard to be normal. I knew that I was wrestling with my queerness. My mother was a minister, but my dad was a drug dealer. He was hiding that he was a drug dealer for about 7 years until he got hooked on drugs. And so most of my childhood was this in and out of an addict as a father. Right. And I'm talking about being able to come home, and if he was on a binge, I'm talking about like your brand new bike, your brand new Sega Genesis or Nintendo, mom's jewelry, the television, gone.
So
pawn.
Yeah.
Him all the money for the bills for drugs. And so now you're getting put out. I mean, I moved every single year of my entire childhood up until high school. So imagine being the new kid every year.
Wow.
There was 1 year in middle school where I spent 7th and 8th grade in the same place. But before that and after, for the most part, I was in a different place every year until a magnet school that I went to in high school. And so I was always this new kid. So it was always about like, how do I fit in? How do I not stand out? How do I not be seen as other? And then everybody that's been queer, growing up in a space that's not accepting and not supportive and loving knows what that feels like too. So I had that thing on top of it, right? So I really, really wrestled with a sense of belonging.
Yeah.
And so to overcompensate, I think for that, I moved into deep perfectionism.
Yeah. I'm going to be the best little boy I'm going to be the best little boy in the world. Yeah.
And so I'll win my mother's love that way. I'll win the school that way. I'll win friends that way. I'll be the best of the best in everything that I do. And so, I didn't realize until therapy later on that, when you're putting that much pressure on yourself, it's like carrying around, a 2-ton shield.
Yeah.
And you don't realize that it's blocking you from getting out to the world. And it's also blocking love from getting in. You're just trying to protect yourself and you're just trying to survive. And so going through a lot of those dark times is, I think, what birthed a lot of that spiritual stuff. I had a wild spiritual experience. I never really share this. But I had a really wild experience once in middle school that let me know that God was real. My father was supposed to pick me up from some after school curricular activity thing. And I remember it kept getting darker and darker and darker. It had to be like the fall. And I remember the janitor asked me to step outside to wait for my parents because he had to lock the school. And everyone left and I was alone. And I'm listening to him lock the chains behind me. And there's a parking lot and the woods and one long street. And I remember watching the street lights come on in the parking lot. And I just cried, not only because I was left and I was alone, but I knew my father wasn't coming.
Yeah.
I knew it. And I knew at however old you are in 6th grade, you're probably 12. I knew that he wasn't coming. I knew that I was stranded. I knew that I was abandoned. I didn't have a cell phone. This is way before the time of cell phone. And I'm stuck out here. And now the janitor has left.
Right.
And I just remember holding onto the straps of my book bag and crying until I felt like I couldn't breathe. And I just felt this still small voice deep inside of me just say, breathe, breathe. So I started breathing slower. And then I heard this voice say, walk. And I just started walking. I walked across the parking lot, and now there's the woods and this street, and I just hear, take a left. And I'm walking down the street, take a right, take a left. I had no idea how long I was walking. All I knew is how I felt, which was deeply alone. And I end up in this neighborhood. And I'm also oddly aware that I'm a young Black boy in an all-white neighborhood. And that's another sense of danger and aloneness.
Yeah.
And I hear the voice say, go up to this door and knock. So I go up to this door and I knock. And it takes a while for somebody to come to the door. And when the door opened, it was my grandmother. It was my father's mother. She was a traveling nurse. And she was at this woman's house that was a client of hers. And she looked at me like she saw a ghost. She's like, what are you doing here? And she's looking behind me. She's like, where's your mother? Where's your father? How did you end up here? And I didn't even have the words. I'm like, I finally just let it all out. And I hold her and she's consoling me and I'm crying and I'm crying and I'm crying. And she eventually realizes what's happening. She calls my mother, who was a teacher at the time, in the inner city school. My mother is like Mother Courage. So anytime there's like the worst neighborhood, that's where she wants to work. So she's, she was a first grade teacher at the time, and they called the office, and my mother came to the phone, and sure enough, she was also stranded. For some reason, I think one of the cars were broken, and my dad had the car. He was supposed to pick us all up that day.
Right.
And he disappeared. We didn't see him for weeks. And one of the things that my dad would do when he was on a binge is he wouldn't want us to see it.
Right.
So he would just
disappear.
And so, I had to do a lot of spiritual work because I had so many triggers from those kind of traumatic experiences. You talk about being ghosted. You talk about people saying they're going to do something and then they don't do it.
Right.
All of those things were like major triggers for me growing up.
Of course.
And so I did a lot of spiritual work. I did a lot of therapy to unearth a lot of those triggers. And so I think, like you said, I as a child, I only wanted to be normal. And then I realized as I got older and the spiritual work really became foundational for me, I realized that no one that I look up to, no one that I listen to, no one that I admire has been absent of going through hard times when they were younger.
Right.
Every person, from the Angela Bassett's, the Viola Davises, the Oprahs of the world, those powerful speakers and artists all have some of the most traumatic, dark pasts that contrast the light that we see them in now. And I tell people now all the time, I don't ever want to listen to somebody who hasn't been through nothing.
Right.
You can't tell me nothing if you ain't been through something.
Right.
I don't want learned in a book. I don't want to know what you just went off in the woods and found. I want to know what you have lived.
Right.
And that is where wisdom comes from. There's knowledge, right? There's enlightenment, there's revelation, but there's also wisdom. And I think that we don't value in this world, in this culture, in this time, wisdom in the way that we used to. I want to know what your lived experience has taught you. And I've been through some shit.
Yeah.
And taught me a lot.
Yeah.
And I used to despise it all until I went through the work of processing it. And now what I realize is it's all the stuff of art.
Yeah.
Every character has a core emotional wound. What is your character's core emotional wound that shapes the decisions that they make, that shapes how they move about in the world? It's like all of that stuff is what the art is made of. And so if you want deep layered art, you got to find a deep layered human. Yeah. You got to find a deep layered artist to do it, which is, part of the conflict I think we're having with the AI of it all, right? Like, some people might be mad at me for saying it. I think that technology is a great tool, but it can't replace the human experience. It's all about those nuances, and it's all about that authenticity.
Right.
And you can't despise, the scripture in the Bible that says, despise not the small beginnings. Yeah. It's like all stuff is where your gold is.
Yeah, I agree. I just want to go back to the fact of all those houses that you could have knocked on. You knocked on the house that your grandmother was at.
This is why, for me, outside of church, outside of whatever, you can't tell me there's not something.
You can't. Yeah.
You can't tell me. I experience it. That's what I mean. Like, I'm not going to get into a debate with someone over whether God is real or not. That to me is irrelevant.
Right.
Your path. I know I experienced personally.
Yes.
Something very real.
Yeah.
That was guiding me.
Yeah.
In one of the most traumatic experiences in my life of being abandoned at a place I was supposed to feel safe by a person I was supposed to feel like I could rely on.
Yeah.
And in that moment, there was a God that I could rely on. There was a something.
Right.
Bigger than me.
Something bigger than you was going on.
Yeah. That kept me safe and guided me to safety.
Beautiful. Wow. Thank you for sharing that story. I got chills and had a little bit of crying happening. I want to talk a little bit about your theater career. You played Marvin Gaye in Motown the Musical. What was it about him as a man that touched you? What did you connect with?
Oh my gosh. Our birthdays are a few days apart, so he's in Aries. I love that. Also, there's something really special about even my journey with Motown. At the time I was singing background for Anita Baker, and we happened to have a little break in our spot dates, and I happened to be in New York, and I ran into a friend on the street who was a choreographer, and he said, I'm working on this workshop of this musical. There's lots of roles for Black men. You should come in. I went in. It was Motown the Musical, and initially I was a Temptation. I love the Temptations. But the artistry and the music that I resonated with the most was Marvin Gaye.
Right.
There was something vulnerable about his work. There was something deep and thought-provoking. I know that the What's Going On record, which was really a big statement politically and about like what was happening in humanity, I knew that he fought to get that record made.
Right.
Because he was kind of known as this kind of like crooner guy, this sexy crooner. So it was a departure of what he was known for. And so I was really fascinated with him as an artist. I was fascinated by the fact that his father killed him. I was fascinated by the fact that his father was known to dress in women's clothing. I thought there was something just very interesting there. I thought it was interesting that even he was suspected of potentially being queer. There was just something fascinating about his journey. And so I had my eye on that role. And when it came time, I was able to audition for it, and I booked it. And it was a wild, really, really wild ride. My first week during rehearsals, and it was, I think I started rehearsals a little bit after the time of Trayvon Martin's death.
Right.
And there was this uprising of the beginnings of what would be Black Lives Matter. And I remember getting a phone call from my mom on a lunch break from a rehearsal that my cousin, who's my age, was shot in a crossfire.
Oof.
And he died. And he was like a brother to me.
I'm so sorry.
And we don't have thank you. We don't have a large family. So it was devastating. And then after I hung up the phone with her, I had to go into rehearsal and sing What's Going On for the first time.
Wow.
So,
oh my God.
It's like the lyric resonated in a way that was personal now. It wasn't like this song or this character was just fascinating. I felt like all of a sudden I was living in a world and an experience that this song resonated with, even though it was written far beyond my knowledge, before I had any knowledge of it. And so I was experiencing something on the stage that I was experiencing in the world.
Right.
And so Motown was kind of the beginning of the possibility and kind of the light bulb that art could also be activism.
Yeah.
That joy could also be resistance. All of that was birthed around the time of that first and second year after Trayvon Martin's death. And so that's when I kind of became involved a little bit more in nonprofits and community activism through my art. And so, yeah, that was also my introduction to Broadway.
Yeah.
But kind of like cracked the world open for me, I think.
Yeah.
Artistic. I think I really feel like that was around the time where I could honestly say I really started to feel like an artist.
Yeah. That's an inspiring way to feel. I also wanted to ask you about Hamilton. You played George Washington in Hamilton for a while. When I saw Hamilton, I've seen it a few times.
Mm-hmm.
I was watching it and I thought, this thing feels like it was just perfect. It just emerged perfect. It doesn't feel like, they figured out the first act. It feels like, no, it was always supposed to be that outfit. It was always supposed to be that choreography. Yep. It just felt perfect. And of course, all shows are a process, right? But what did it feel like to be in it? It just feels flawless in a way to me to watch it.
I didn't want to be in it. I didn't. What you said, I thought it was perfect. Like I have tons of friends in it, and one of them is Leslie Odom Jr., who I love, and I just thought he is so perfect. Every choice, every decision made on that stage is literally exactly what it's supposed to be. I don't need to be in this show. I don't want to audition. But we all know that if a show is going to be successful,
it's going to keep running.
So I got the phone call to come in for George Washington, and I thought, maybe this is an opportunity, because I think if I would have gotten called in for Burr, I would have literally just been a carbon copy of Leslie, because I just thought everything that he did was perfect. I love Chris Jackson. Chris Jackson is an amazing and was an amazing George Washington. He put a stamp all over it. But I think the show was changing and the climate of the world was changing right after the Tonys, which is around the time that I was kind of introduced to the show later that year. And so what was like, you know, the biggest show to ever hit Broadway, it was like all these folks were rock stars now. By the time I joined, you know, our government was shifting.
Yeah.
And the show, the cast had made, you know, a statement to Mike Pence.
Right. I wrote that on my sheet. I was like, were you there when Pence came?
Yeah, I was.
Wow.
And so I was entering this show when what the show meant to the artistic community was becoming something different.
Yeah.
They were in police presence around the show.
Wow.
There were more guards outside. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm just coming to do a Broadway show. Why do I feel like I'm doing a protest piece?
Right.
My first day on the show, I was singing a song in Act 2 that George Washington sings called One Last Time.
Yeah.
And George, it's a version of George Washington's letter that he wrote as it's his final address.
Right.
And what was wild about it is I remember I was walking downstage to go center stage to finish the number. And I was very aware that as a Black man, I was playing the first president of the United States.
Right.
Singing his final address at the same time that the first Black president was giving his final address at the same time.
Wow.
So I believe in his address, he was quoting the show. So it was kind of this weird, I've had this weird experience. I had it with Motown and I had it with Hamilton as well, where like the art that I was doing was resonating with the world around me and resonating with myself in a way that didn't keep them separate. So I'm playing a Black man as the first president while the first Black president is making his final speech, and I'm seeing the final speech of Washington at the same time. And what was crazy was the building was electric. We all knew it. So by the time I got to the end and I was weeping, I looked out into the audience and the audience was weeping because we all knew that our president was also giving his final address literally at the same time.
Right.
Motown was something really magical and special for me. And then Hamilton like took that work up a notch.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, initially I was like, it's going to feel like the Broadway version of being in sync. You know what I mean? You come out that stage door and it's roaring fans, and it was
yeah.
Oh, it was not a typical Broadway experience. But at the same time, artistically, man, I feel like I grew roots.
Yeah.
I feel like my well just got deeper in playing in that show. Yeah.
Sometimes musicals to me are so beautiful that I cry, not because of the story, but just the overwhelm.
Yeah.
When you're in the middle of one, do you ever feel that, or are you able to just be the character? You know, like, do you know what I'm saying? Like
both. I think especially when it comes to Alex Lacamoire, who, you know, did the orchestrations for Hamilton.
Right.
We don't realize that like it's the music that's carrying the emotion.
Right.
So even that is intentional. If you really sit back and look at the science of Hamilton, there are moments where they have elements that sound like now. So there are artificial sounds that are tracked up. There's Foley, you know, we hear the gunshots and the cannons and all these things, right? But then there are times where there are just live strings.
Yeah. And you just cry.
And you just cry.
Because it's so beautiful.
It's so beautiful. And the melodies that he's chosen and the lines of the string instruments just hit the right emotion for what's happening in the story. And that, to be able to create things like that, where you know the emotional intelligence of the artist is involved. They're creating an emotional journey, an emotional escape through the sounds that you're having. That's a skill all to itself that my hat is off to, you know? So the thing about Hamilton that's great is it's just such a beautiful collaboration of amazing artists.
Yeah. At the top of their game, and it feels divine as well. Like, it just has this feeling. I look at pictures of you on your Instagram in those costumes, and I'm like, I think I would never take that costume off. There's something so beautiful about it, right?
Look, every now and then when I'm in the gym and I just reminisce about the show, I just think to myself, I can still fit those costumes. So if there's time for me to go back, and I'm back before, I think I'm happy where I am right now in terms of things that I'm creating. But even just talking about it, I had a great time in Hamilton. Everybody's experience is different, but when I tell you, I had an amazing time playing George Washington.
Yeah.
It was great.
I love it. Speaking of fashion, one of the things I love about having so many out actors in these big projects, people like you, Matt Bomer, the red carpet game is awesome. Like they can be riskier. They don't have to worry about people will think I'm gay. They know you're gay. So I'm going to go sleeveless. I'm going to go sheer. I don't give a shit. Are you having fun with it? It looks like you're having fun with it, but also it must be expensive. Or do you have somebody helping you out?
I'm having the time of my life. And luckily and thankfully, the person that is helping me out is my husband.
Oh, right on. Yeah, he does costumes and all that. Yeah.
A costume designer. He's got his hand in the fashion game in a way that is really incognito right now. So I don't want to drop too much of his news that is to come. But we really are a team in that way. I think that, and this is not for everybody, but there's something, I see it in Diarra and Miles. And it's something I really appreciate. I have cousins who work together in the industry. And I really respect my husband. I really respect his artistic eye. And what's great is that not only does he have a great sense of style and fashion, but he knows how to tell a story. And so there are times where I just have to tell him what the event is and kind of how I want to feel. Or sometimes he's even ahead of me and he's able to look down the line and go, for this, you're going to want something like this. For this, you're going to want something like that. And especially as queer men, when we put on clothes, it's kind of an extension of our personality. It's an extension of what we want to say in the world. And I'm really blessed because this is my first kind of like press run with a TV show. Yeah. I've obviously done red carpets and stuff before, but when you're in a press run, sometimes you're just exhausted. And the last thing you want to think about is like, what am I wearing? And my husband has done a great job of supporting me in this season. I have loved almost, I think, every single look. Right. No, I can say, I try not to like lie. So I'm trying to think about it. Yeah, I've literally loved every single look.
Well, they're different. They're fabulous. It looks like you're having a fun time with it. So hats off. And I love seeing I love that there's sort of just queer men out on the carpet doing these things. It wasn't that long ago. What's it like out there now in terms of these things? How does it feel?
I think the good news is I feel like I have two friends and I just want to mention them. Yeah. In the lexicon of like queer Black artists where I really respect their art, but also they show up and kill the fashion game. And that is Coleman Domingo.
He's killing it.
Killing the game.
I worked with him on the Big Gay Sketch Show. I was one of the writers on that, and I did the final season, and it's so cool to see him have this moment. Poor Coleman, he used to have to play all the Black women celebrities. So he was Oprah, he was Tyra, and he was a good sport about it, but it was like, it was a lot. Yeah.
I'm sure he had them all. Yeah. I love him. I just saw him a couple of days ago and he looked amazing. So I love these Black queer men who have just found their personal style. And the other one is Jeremy Pope. I think Jeremy Pope is doing a great job of like really striking that line between like high fashion and then like the avant-garde of it. And I've been enjoying watching his journey in his fashion as well. So those are two people that I think right now are in the game that I look at them and I'm just like, yeah, we're out here and we're killing it.
I love it. You went and spoke to young people, I think. Do you hear from them? Do you feel like a role model being an out queer actor of color? Like, how do you register that's making an impact or not?
It's new. I registered that that's making an impact because these young people are very outspoken. And
they let you know how they think.
This generation, they are not holding back. So I feel like every time I go and speak at a college, every time that I'm in the industry and there's a younger performing artist, they all come up to me and tell me how my presence has inspired or encouraged them. And I gotta honestly say that I get it. This is the part that makes me want to cry because like I didn't get a chance to see it. Yeah. Like when I'm coming up, Again, spaces like Baltimore, like Philadelphia, if you are out, it's because you were forced out. It's because of your gender presentation or your masculine or feminine energy. It wasn't necessarily just because I didn't have it. I didn't have people who were like, I'm coming out because I just want to. Right. I deserve every right and every privilege that everybody else has around me. I just didn't have it. And so what was hard for me is that I would look into the gay community, I would look into the queer community, and I couldn't locate myself. Imagine finally having the courage to come out and you look out into the space and there's no you. And I don't feel like that's the case anymore. And that's the part that kind of makes my heart sing. Yeah. That's the part I want to cry, is that, and it also makes me feel a little old.
Yeah.
This idea that like young people hit me up in my DMs all the time, or like come up to me at events and they say, you know, I've been following your career for some time and I'm just so thankful that you're here. And I'm thankful that you're not shying away from who you really are. And that level of authenticity being rewarded by the people that reflect it is almost like winning an Oscar. Because to me, what it validates is the purpose that I have in the work, not just the work.
Yeah.
I think representation is everything.
Yeah.
It's important to know that you're not alone. I think it's important to know that someone is treading the path that you want to tread. And I think it's important to see yourself represented.
Yeah.
To see yourself reflected back to yourself. I was watching this Instagram thing the other day that said, it's so interesting that when you look at a mirror, you're actually looking at a inverted image of yourself.
Right.
And that you never really see yourself fully for how you look, except through the eyes of the people around you. And I think it's a beautiful thing. And I don't take it lightly. I think it's a privilege to be able to reflect back to my community who we are.
Yeah.
Who we really are. So my heart is full. It makes me it does make me feel a little older. I ain't gonna lie.
Yeah, no, I feel you.
Like, ooh,
yeah.
I'm a mentor.
I get it. Yeah.
I'm a mentor now. But I'm enjoying it.
I have one more question for you, but I first want to tell everyone that they have to watch Diarra from Detroit on BET Plus. It's so good. You're great on it. The whole show is wonderful. I hope there's a season 2. Is there anything else you want to promote that's out there? Anything you want to get a plug in for?
There's so much out here. I don't want to plug too much because I'm developing some things.
Yeah, I like it.
But you all will see some projects from me in the next year. So just follow me on Instagram at @TheRealBTC, or you can find my website, www.Bryan, with a Y, TerrellClark.com.
Love it.
Yeah.
All right, here's my final question, my final thought. It's Pride Month. What does Pride mean to you? Or do you have memories of your first Pride? Anything about Pride that comes up for you?
I just walked in my first WeHo Pride.
Nice.
West Hollywood Pride. I just walked in my first Pride. I believe that was last weekend.
Yeah.
There is such an overwhelming sense of belonging. So what Pride means to me is 2 things. Joy as resistance, because we've got a lot of hell to put up with and work through every day of our lives. We deserve the right to joy. We deserve the right to happiness. And so the fact that we use joy as our resistance is deeply entrenched in Black culture, but is also deeply entrenched in queer culture. We have to keep joy as our resistance. And the second thing that is overwhelming in my heart is a sense of belonging. So for those of you out there, I know some of us who've been open and out and have found our friends and found our community. Sometimes we take it for granted. You are not alone. You are not alone. I say to anyone who has not had the opportunity to find safe spaces, first, find safety. Find safety. You don't have to force yourself to come out if you are not safe. Find safe spaces first. And then secondly, attract your community, because we are here and we will love you and we will love you for all that you are. You won't have to compartmentalize who you are. And that's what Pride means to me.
I love it. To me, I sort of boiled it down to this for me, and maybe this will resonate. I think it's a group of people who grew up thinking something was wrong with them, coming together to celebrate the fact that there isn't. And because when people will say, why do we need this? Why is it still a thing? Aren't we beyond that?
Yeah.
I don't think so. I think that stuff's pretty deep. And if dancing to Kylie will heal that a little bit, then I say go for it.
Also, we got to do it for the people around the world. I know we got to go, but I I don't want to make it too light, because the thing about it is we make Pride look like a party.
Yeah.
But you don't realize there are still, and I believe it's like in the 60s or 70s. This is something anybody can Google. But like being queer around the world is still very dangerous. It's punishable by death. Still in 2000. It's still punishable by death. So like what we're doing when we come together and we're saying we belong and we deserve life, it's not hyperbolic.
Yeah.
It's very, very real, and it's very, very true. There are spaces that as a Black, openly gay man, I could go to and be put in prison. There are spaces as a Black, openly gay man that I could go to and it could be punishable by death because of who I love and who I've married. And so, I'm thankful that we got the rainbows. I'm thankful that we got the glitter. I'm thankful that we're fabulous, because we are. Yeah. But by stretch of the imagination, are we to think that it doesn't take immense bravery for us to be exactly who we are. And so that's also what Pride means to me.
That's beautiful. Bryan, I've loved this conversation. Thank you for just like meeting me at a thing and being like, I'll be on your podcast. I really loved it.
You had great energy.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah. I love it. Well, I hope you guys get a season 2. I hope our paths cross sometime soon. And thank you for taking the time and having this conversation. I've loved it.
Thank you so much. Have a great week.
Thanks again to Bryan Terrell Clark for doing the podcast. Watch Diarra from Detroit. I really wanted to get a second season because it's one of my favorite shows I've seen in a very long time. It's on BET+. All right, so this happened. I mentioned the FYC event that I went to for Diarra from Detroit. I've been to a few others as well during the season. They're trying to get Emmy nominations, and I'm in the Writers Guild, and I get invited to some things, and other friends have invited me to things. Anyway, here's my takeaway. Sometimes the moderators are decent. Once in a while, they're really good, but a lot of times they're not very good. And so I am going to make it my mission to try to get the opportunity to moderate some panels in the next year. That's my goal. You know how on Hacks, I don't know if you're watching Hacks, but she decides she wants this late night gig, and she just starts telling the world that's what she wants. She'll go on shows and say, I want to be the successor to so-and-so on The Late Show or whatever. She just says it out loud. So I want to moderate panels. I think I'm really good at it. It's the 10,000 hours things. I've interviewed a lot of folks. I have been to a lot of panels. They're not there to hear you talk. They're not there even to hear you gush about the person. Just like get it quick, get to the questions, because you've got a limited amount of time. You've got these interesting people up there, and you want to get the goods out of them. You want to get something interesting out of them, something funny, something heartwarming, something real, something you could take away. And I feel like I am good at that. Sometimes I'm at these Q&As, and I'll literally want to go into the bathroom, change into a cape and tights, and swoop in and save the day. I know that's a little cocky, but I'm pulling a little Deborah Vance on you all. What have I got to lose at this point? Really? Nothing. And so I want to do panels. So if you know anyone with leads to that, I'm creating a page on my website to kind of do that. And Robert Chandler, who interviewed me for my 10th anniversary, he's familiar with that field, and he's going to sit down and strategize with me. So there's that. Putting it out there. And I will say this. Often my hand shoots up in those Q&As, and I ask the best question. I do. Because I kind of have an instinct for what people are likely to say. And what questions are likely to spark something, a story. You know, it's just because I've been doing it. I know this stuff. So anyway, there I am. The cockiest proposal you've heard from an underemployed person in a long time, I'm sure. But there it is. I'm putting it out there. All right, thanks for listening. That's enough for this week. Shout out to Oscar Rosario for mixing the episodes. My theme music is by Mark Daniels for replacement music. We'll catch you next time on Dennis Anyone. Bye.